on a daily basis. He had 2 articles published there today. But he told me he put those in like 3 months ago. They finally appeared. You're the editor-in-chief. You should be able to get your things in a lot faster.
Well, I finished one last night that went up at 7 p.m. this evening, so that was, I pulled rank.
Chris is a writing professor at the Jandoli School of Communications at St. Bonaventure University in Allegany, where he serves as the Associate Dean of the undergraduate programs. He is the historian in residence at Stevenson Ridge, where we visited a couple years ago, where we were on our Fredericksburg tour. He has worked as a historian for the National Park Service in Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania. He got Bobby Crick, probably senior, and probably junior too, certainly. He gives tours on Virginia battlefields, and obviously he's going to be giving one of the tour guides for Nemesis tour. So he's authored or co-authored nearly 24 books and edited half a dozen essay collections on the Civil War. So we're very honored to have Chris Mackowski speak to us tonight. Chris?
First of all, I come bearing greetings. My great Polish brother, Chris Kolakowski, whom I saw last night, asked me to pass along his regards. I got the chance to hang out with him a little bit in Milwaukee last night. And Ted Savas, my publisher at Savas Beatie, also asked me to say hello. And my friend Wayne Mott said he had a heck of a good time with you guys last month and wanted me to say thanks. So I think that that's all the correspondence I have for this evening's agenda for you. It is an incredible honor to be able to spend some time with the roundtable, and I don't get to say that, right? It's a privilege, it's an honor. I'm really glad to be able to spend some time with you guys. You guys came to my neck of the woods the last time I had the chance to spend some time with you, so it's nice to be able to come to your neck of the woods. As Bruce was kind of going over this day in history, today's actually also the anniversary of the Battle of McDowell, the opening engagement of Jackson's Valley Campaign in 1862. We're going to hear from one of those combatants, Edward Allegany Johnston, tonight. And also in 1864, it's the opening of Spotsylvania, which we'll talk about as well. How many of you have been to Spotsylvania before? Okay, very good, very good. And it's a pristine battlefield. It's one of the things I like most about it. When you stand there, it's like you're stepping back into time and you're seeing what the soldiers saw when they first showed up on the morning of May 8th, 1864. And as we'll talk a little bit tonight, kind of the events that unfolded there really make that landscape, to me, just an amazingly powerful place to stand when you juxtapose how beautiful it is with how awful it was. To see how the soldiers got there, I want us to back up just a little bit to a little earlier in May of 1864. Ulysses S. Grant, the new commander of all Union armies, has come to the east, and he is going to travel with the Army of the Potomac under George Gordon Meade, and he's going to change the fundamental way that the war has been waged. How many of you have heard that Gettysburg is the turning point of the war? Okay. Anybody here agree with that sentiment?
No.
Thank you. Thank you very much. See? Normally I have to, people look, yeah, and then I have to tell them, balderdash. It's nonsense, right? The turning point of the Civil War takes place on the night of May 7th, 1864. Because as the armies have fought in the wilderness, which we're going to place in our room back here, they fight here on the 5th, they fight here on the 6th. Throughout the 7th, they skirmish back and forth with the woods blazing around them, the foliage so dense they can't even see who they're fighting against, men stacking up bodies of wounded and dead comrades in front of them as breastworks. And in the midst of all that, Ulysses S. Grant has to decide what to do next. And he had vowed when he crossed the Rapidan River there would be no turning back. And up to this point, the armies would clash, they'd fight for a couple days like they have here at the Wilderness, and then they would withdraw and spend a couple weeks resupplying, re-equipping, reinforcing. And the armies are now expecting the same thing to happen. Grant could head off in this direction toward Fredericksburg, where he's got an infrastructure to support his army. He could retreat back toward Culpeper, where his army had spent the winter. And instead, he just goes around Robert E. Lee and continues down the Brock Road towards Spotsylvania Courthouse, which will be represented by our lectern here tonight. He goes around and he will fight his way down this road. And what starts in the wilderness leads to 6 straight weeks of nonstop fighting, movement, and maneuver. Constant contact between these two armies, unprecedented in the war up to this point. There is no withdrawing and catching your breath. Grant says when this campaign opens that he wants a war of annihilation because it's an election year and Lincoln's election prospects don't look very good. And unless Grant can get some battlefield victories, things aren't going to go very well at the polls. And so he's looking for that knockout blow. But he tells George Gordon Meade, commander of the Army of the Potomac, that if you can't get that knockout blow, then if by no other means than attrition, will simply wear the Confederates out. So think about, instead of that haymaker, think about rabbit punches to the kidneys. Okay? Because Grant knows the Union has more men, more material, more money, more everything. And he's going to exert the numerical superiority in ways that have not yet been exerted. And just use the Confederates up. And he tells that not only to Meade, but he tells that to his good friend Uncle Billy Sherman. He tells that to Nathaniel Banks, who's supposed to go up the Red River, maybe even conducting a campaign against Mobile, Alabama. He's going to tell that to Benjamin Butler coming up the James Peninsula against Richmond from the south. He's going to tell it to Franz Sigel moving up the Shenandoah Valley from north to south. And as all of these troops move at once, the numerical superiority of the Union will tie the Confederates down so they can't shift reinforcements from one theater to the other. Think about James Longstreet showing up from the east at Chickamauga on the eve of battle to turn the tide. No more of that nonsense. Grant's going to move everybody at once, tying the Confederates down, and then just start hammering away. The other thing that he changes is the objective. He's going to move on Richmond, if we were to continue through the podium, off out into the parking lot, heading toward the Confederate capital, which is not really important. Up to this point in the war, it's been on to Richmond. But Grant realizes it's not the Confederate politicians that are keeping the Confederacy alive, it's the Confederate armies. And so he's going to move on Richmond only because he knows Robert E. Lee has to defend Richmond. And by threatening Richmond, Lee's going to come out where Grant can get him into open field combat and start swinging those haymakers. It's all about destroying Lee's army. So that's why when he leaves the wilderness, heading towards Spotsylvania, he's trying to draw Lee out of those woods into another open field fight where he can use that numerical superiority. Just how many men does he have? About 120,000 guys, compared to Lee's 66,000 guys. By the time they leave the wilderness, Grant's down to 100,000 guys, and Lee's down to 55. And Grant's just going to keep doing that. He moves towards Spotsylvania because there's a road network that's going to give him options for moving on Richmond. He wants to be in here on the morning of May 8th by 8 a.m. 163 years ago, or 162 years ago today. I'm a writer. Nobody said there'd be numbers involved. I'm sorry. In order to do that, he's got to clear this road. It's called the Brock Road, and he's going to send his cavalry out under Phil Sheridan. And the cavalry's trying to do its job. They can't quite clear the road, so they fall back to an area right about here called Todd's Tavern, and they encamp. Well, meanwhile, Grant and Meade at the head of the infantry come marching down here, and about midnight they see all these sleeping troopers, and they wonder, what are you guys doing here? And if you know anything about George Gordon Meade, you know he's a very calm, cool, rational character. And he starts kicking butts. Get up, what are you doing? And he looks for his cavalry commander, Phil Sheridan, who was nowhere to be found. Sheridan's off toward the Chancellorsville battlefield in that direction, gallivanting. And so Meade's going to give orders directly to the division commanders. Clear that road. And they're going to push forward and they're going to try to clear that road. In the meantime, Sheridan finally comes back and he's like, what are you doing giving orders to my men for? And Meade's like, well, I'd give orders to you, but you weren't here. And they have this big blow up that is, by any definition, insubordination. The kind of thing Sheridan should be fired for. Except Meade can't fire him, because Sheridan is Grant's buddy. When Grant came to the east, he brought Sheridan with him, and he put Sheridan in charge of this army's cavalry. And Sheridan and Meade have very different ideas about how cavalry should be used, and they've never reconciled that. Sheridan's had a couple lousy days in charge of the cavalry in the wilderness, and now he's dropping the ball again. No wonder Meade's upset, but he can't do anything about it. The best he can do, after they have this big explosive argument, Meade, surprisingly, is the one who de-escalates the situation, and Sheridan storms off. And all Meade can do is go to Grant and be like, your buddy just came into mine, and he said, blah, blah, blah. And Grant's like, wait, what did he say? And Meade said, well, he just said he'd go off and get Jeb Stuart and the cavalry all by himself. And Grant stops him. He says, well, Sheridan generally knows what he's talking about. Cut the orders and let him go. Okay. And I'm a Grant fan. I love Grant. I respect the guy a lot. This is one of his worst moments of the war, because he backs his buddy instead of his army commander, which from the perspective of discipline, cohesion, chain of command, all those things that make an army work, he violates them. And he backs his buddy. So Meade cuts the orders, and Sheridan the next day will ride off with more than 12,000 federal cavalry. He will lure Jeb Stuart and about half the Confederate cavalry to go after him. Battle of Yellow Tavern on May 11th. Stuart will be mortally wounded, and Sheridan gets a free pass. Ooh, he kills Jeb Stuart, yay, you know. But the whole rest of the raid's a disaster that leaves behind hundreds of dead horses and horsemen. Sheridan's almost cut off, and it takes him 3 weeks before he comes back. 3 weeks that leave George Gordon Meade and his army blind and deaf, because your cavalry acts as your eyes and ears, and Sheridan has just left with them. And so I'm calling out Phil Sheridan. History gives him a free pass, but Meade is going to have to grope across the landscape at Spotsylvania and down to the North Anna River, and it's going to cost thousands of federal lives because there's no eyes and ears. That's all going to be in the future, but in the meantime, the cavalry is unable to clear this road, so Meade's going to have to send in his infantry. It's going to be a division under General Robinson in the 5th Corps, and he's going to have to push forward. Now, can I conscript the 4 of you into the Confederate cavalry for just a moment? Would you mind? If you would just kind of stand up here for just a moment. All right. See, this is why nobody volunteers for anything, so they get conscripted, okay? All right, so now this is the Brock Road, and I'm going to have the 2 of you just stand right here, shoulder to shoulder. And I'm going to have the 2 of you come back here. You're going to come back to this next little rise on the road. All right? You're going to stand right next to her. Okay?
Facing the wrong direction.
No, we're going to see. So, yes, you are facing the wrong direction, but I don't want to have my back to the audience so that the guys can hear. So we are heading in this direction. You are correct. So what the cavalry does is they set up on a little rise in the road, and they block the road, but then they divide in half, so you guys go to the next rise and block it, okay? So if I'm Robinson's guys and I'm pushing forward, you're blocking the road, so I've got to go from my column of march into line of battle. And I'm going to push forward, trying to outflank you, and just as I get within rifle range, because you have horses, you just hop on your horses and you're going to ride away. And you're going to go beyond them to the next ridge. This is where we need coconuts. Right? All right, now they're going to block the ridge. Now I've got to get back into my line of march. I've got to push forward. Oh, look, you've blocked the road. And so now I've got to get back into line of battle. I push forward. As I get within rifle range, guess what you do? Yeah. Top. So now I got to get back in the line of, and I push forward. And I feel like I'm playing the accordion here, right? As the Federals do this, they're getting exhausted. They're double timing from position to position. Their units are getting mixed up. Unit cohesion is breaking down. Regiments are getting conflated and confused with each other as they push forward. Oh my God. And so this repeats itself as the Federals move down toward Spotsylvania Courthouse. The cavalry can't stop the infantry, but they can sure slow them down. Let's give it up for our conscripts. Thank you very much.
Grandfather was in the Confederate.
See, look at this. I got a ringer here. Her
12th Virginia.
12th Virginia. Her ancestors in the 12th Virginia Cav. Look at that. She was a natural. I knew it. See? Okay. The reason this delaying action is so important is because Lee has to get out of the wilderness himself. He's back here. He's got to cut his own road, link up with the road system a little further off to the west, march twice as far to get down and block the road into Spotsylvania Courthouse. So he's depending on his cavalry to delay them as he does that. The man who's going to be leading that march is Richard Herron Anderson, South Carolina gentleman, well respected by his army. He's got a fairly decent track record. But, you know, in an army that runs on charisma, Anderson is vanilla. Right? I like vanilla. Vanilla's delicious. But this is an army that runs on Rocky Road and Neapolitan and banana pudding flavored ice cream, which is a miracle. If you've never been to the South, banana pudding ice cream is a thing. It's wonderful, right? This is an army that, you know, like Robert E. Lee, James Longstreet, Jeb Stuart, Stonewall Jackson. That's the charisma, the cults of personality that the Army of Northern Virginia runs on. Richard Herron Anderson is okay, right? And so that'll be a problem as this campaign unravels, but he's given this task to get out of the wilderness. He's told to leave at 2 a.m. on May 8th. But where the First Corps is encamped, there's a forest fire raging through, so Anderson's going to get a 4-hour head start. He's going to leave at 10 p.m. on May 7th, and he's going to start marching down, and he gets off to the west a little bit, and he's going to finally let his men rest, and as they do, a cavalry messenger runs up and says, "You got to hurry up and get down here. The Yankees are heading towards Spotsylvania. We need you to come help block the road." And so Anderson's going to get his guys into line. They're going to double time the last 2 miles, and they're going to deploy across the road on the last defensible ridge before the village. They're getting into position even as the Federals are coming out of their accordion again and getting ready to push forward. Peter Lyle's brigade, he's got 5 regiments plus a 6th regiment from Maryland that's mixed up with his guys, and they're going to come across the north side of the road, and for the first time, the cavalry doesn't hop on their horses and ride away. Jeb Stuart points to a fence line and tells Anderson's guys, "Run up there, get to that fence. If you don't run, then Billy Yank's going to get there before you do." And Anderson's men block the road, even as Lyle's guys get there, and they crash against it the way water hits a break wall. And they get pinned into a big fishbowl that's in the landscape there. Confederates can't depress their rifles to shoot in on them, so they get a little bit of safety, but they can't run the gauntlet back across the field. Even as they're kind of getting pinned, the next brigade starts coming up. Dennison's Maryland Brigade coming up on the south side of the road. Jeb Stuart points to that. The next group of Confederates get into position even as the Marylanders get there. There's a hand-to-hand fight. The Marylanders are repulsed. Robinson gets shot off his horse through the knee, will earn the Medal of Honor trying to lead this attack, but it'll be unsuccessful. A 3rd brigade comes through, a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th. All of them repulsed because Jeb Stuart, riding up and down the line, points at the moment of crisis, at the point of attack, getting reinforcements into place at the exact moment they need to be there. It's one of his finest days of the war. He's riding up and down the line, laughing and singing, having a grand old time. Ostrich plume in his hat, waving majestically behind him. Ironically, one of the songs he sings is Lorena, which is a sad song. I don't know why he's singing it, but he's having a grand old time. The Union commander over here, Gouverneur K. Warren, is pretty flummoxed. He's had a bad couple days in the wilderness, and now he's had a bad opening to Spotsylvania. We're supposed to be in the courthouse by 8 a.m. By 9 o'clock, this has all played itself out, and he has been repulsed at every point. Now, he'd been criticized in the wilderness for letting the Confederates have time to dig in on the opening day instead of just attacking right away. So here he tries attacking right away, and that also fails. It's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't sorts of situations. So what's he going to do? He's going to bring the next two divisions into line, and he's going to organize them in attack with half of his corps all at once. But more Confederates are coming onto the field, digging in, fortifying this position, anchoring it down here against the Po River, and that attack will be repulsed as well. The one advantage is now that he's got all his guys in, he's going to bring up his 4th Division and kind of help bolster his reserves. As these guys come in, that opens up a bottleneck that has formed on this road. So John Sedgwick will be able to bring up his 6th Corps, and he's going to deploy into this direction, linking up with Warren. Now, Sedgwick's the senior guy in the field. He should take over. But he sees that Warren is apoplectic with frustration. And Sedgwick, trying to exert a little bit of calmness, he says, "Tell me what you need me to do. You've been here all day. You know the situation on the ground. How can I help?" And so Warren is going to take his whole corps and Sedgwick's whole corps, half of the army, and attack again late in the day on the 8th. But more Confederates are continuing to come onto the field, extending their line up in this direction. And even as this massive attack comes, Confederates are coming onto the field in time to do a counterattack and push back. And so Warren will be repulsed again. And that's where things stand at the end of the day on May 8th. The Union 2nd Corps is still stuck back here at Todd's Tavern. They can't get to the battlefield because of all this bottleneck. Hancock will eventually pull forward and move down here onto the flank. And then Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps can't get to the battlefield at all. They're going to have to march to the east and come down along Fredericksburg Road and come towards Spotsylvania sort of through the back door. They won't arrive here until the morning of May 9th. There'll be some fighting across the area around the Nye River. Burnside will be able to establish a position here, which, wonderfully for me, my family now owns this part of the battlefield. I married into this 12 years ago. Nobody ever cares about it. It's never been preserved by the Park Service since Ambrose Burnside. Nobody cares about it. Okay? I tell my wife, I love her for more than her earthworks. But she's got very nice earthworks, let me tell you, right? Okay. This is a huge, huge advantage for Grant, though, because by capturing this road, he's able to shorten his supply line from Culpeper, 30 miles in that direction, to Fredericksburg, only 10 miles in this direction. Burnside's an easy guy to make fun of. He is spectacularly mediocre. But he does have some successes at Spotsy. This is his most important success because he's able to create this incredible operational advantage for Grant's forces by creating this shorter supply line. Also on the morning of the 9th, John Sedgwick sees that his guys over here are getting shot at by Confederate sharpshooters who are in this position. And that's about 600 yards separating the lines. I'm not a shooter myself, but I'm told by people who are that 600 yards, pretty good shot. But this is Joseph Hennigan's Hennigan's brigade, John Hennigan's brigade, Joseph Kershaw's old division. Guys from upcountry in South Carolina used to, squirrel hunters shooting little things off branches and stuff. So maybe they can do 800 yards. But at the most, or 600 yards, but at the most, it's harassing fire. Just, kind of make these guys keep their heads down. So Sedgwick wants to come down and see if there's anything he can do to help his guys. And his staff's like, you're a major general. You shouldn't be out in the front lines like that. And he's like, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. It's such a John Sedgwick thing. He's a 50-year-old bachelor who's been married to the Army his whole career. His men love him so much, they call him Uncle John. Because he's out on the campaign trail with those guys. When they're camping, he's under the stars with them. He loves them. They love him. And so he's legitimately concerned about his guys. So he's come down, he moves some artillery out of the way. There's a main regiment that's getting in the way, and he shuffles things around, and the bullets are coming in, and guys are ducking, and one artillerist dives at Sedgwick's feet, and Sedgwick laughs at him and kind of nudges him. He says, what are you doing? The guy says, well, I ducked at one of the big ones once. It saved my life. Sedgwick says, oh, get up, you know. I mean, if you think it's going to save your life, fine, but they can't hit an elephant at this distance, right? So you go about your business. I mean, you don't hear the bullet that kills you, right? So I'm telling you, they can't hit an elephant at this distance. And as soon as he says it that second time, they can't hit an elephant, but they can hit a major general. He gets plugged 1.5 inches below his left eye. He spins around, he falls over, instantly dead, blood fountaining from his face. He's got a smile on his expression. He'll be replaced by one of his proteges, a guy named Horatio Wright. Wright's got to come and figure out how to be in charge of the largest corps in the Army, 23,000 guys or so. And Wright's going to have some subordinates who are going to come to him with an idea for a new type of tactical attack. So there's a double learning curve that Wright is going to have to overcome. Meanwhile, Robert E. Lee is also looking at his position, and he sees this is a well-fortified spot. And as the Confederates have been coming out of the field, they've just been following a ridge line that has blocked this, anchored over here. But the ridge line then kind of curves up and around. Now, this would be normally I'd walk out there, and you're going to be the tip of the big round position. You're about to have a bad day. I apologize. Get your old clubby stick out there. You're going to be Edward Allegany Johnson in a second. You got the club and everything. Okay. So because of this curved position that then comes down off into this direction and blocks the road, it looks like a big horseshoe or a mule shoe. There are more mules than horses in the Army, so that's why we call it the mule shoe. It's something that's actually more familiar than a horseshoe for these guys. And as Lee looks at this position, a salient like that is inherently vulnerable for a lot of reasons. So for instance, if you're a defender of the salient and you're firing out, your fire fans out over space. Whereas people firing in, their fire concentrates. So they have what's called converging fire, and you have what's called diverging fire. So your firepower gets less effective over distance, theirs gets more effective. So that's not a real good reason to have a salient. Also, you're subject to a crossfire. So Dennis, if you want to set up some artillery and be shooting at these guys here, but you can also be shooting at the backs of these guys. You can be shooting this way and over there. So there's this crossfire effect that creates problems if you're defending a salient. So that's not a very good idea either. And if someone breaks through, they're in the rear of the whole position. It makes the whole line untenable. So that's also a bad reason to have a salient. But as Lee considers his options, there's a piece of high ground right here in the middle, owned by Neil McCool and his two sisters. And if Lee were to just seal off the base of this, Federals could put some artillery in that high ground or a little further back at Landrum Lane and bombard Lee's line in what's called enfilading fashion. So it's not just straight on, but it would be like shooting down the line. Well, that's terrible. We don't want that to happen. So Lee talks to his second in command, who's in charge here, a guy named Richard Ewell. And Ewell says, well, I can hold this if you give me enough artillery. And Lee talks to his chief engineer, Martin Luther Smith. And Smith says, well, we can hold that if we've got enough artillery. And Lee talks to the artillerists who are like, hell yeah, we can hold it, right? And so Lee's going to pack this salient with 30 pieces of artillery, and he's going to let it stand. Now, I want to point out, Lee is a trained engineer who has consulted the experts and come to a reasonable conclusion. He is the Harry Truman of this army. The buck stops here. He makes this choice. As we'll talk about in a second, calamity is about to befall these Confederates, and Richard Ewell will get the blame. Lee is the one who made this choice, not Richard Ewell. But we can't poke fun at the great marble man, and so there has to be a fall guy. Right? So as the Federals are trying to figure out how to exploit this, some of Horatio Wright's subordinates are doing some reconnaissance, and they realize they can get within about 300 yards of the side of the salient, without being detected because of the way the landscape hides these guys. They can advance pretty close. And so as they talk about how to exploit this, what they want to do is, instead of a traditional line of battle where a whole big bunch of guys are just going to sweep forward, they decide to organize 12 hand-picked regiments into a column that's going to punch like a fist. Emory Upton will be chosen. He's a young colonel who's thrown his men into every single fight he can find. He's from Batavia, New York. It's halfway between Rochester and Buffalo. And he is kind of one of these young Turks who's just graduated, looking to make a name for himself. To his credit, he's one of those guys who doesn't say, "Go capture that." He's like, "Follow me, boys." He's leading from the front. So he's not necessarily beloved by his men, but he's well respected by his men. Upton will go on to have an extremely distinguished career in the United States Army. He'll, after the war, be sent to Europe as an observer. He'll come back. He'll write a tactical manual that the Army will use all the way to World War II. That's how influential he is in this Army. And so he's told that he's going to lead this attack. First thing he does is he gets all the regimental commanders together and he goes up into that area and he says, "Look, here's what we're going to do." And he explains to all of the regimental commanders his intent. And he later says one of the great flaws of this army is that command intent never gets filtered down to line officers and down to the regimental company levels. And so he says, if somebody gets shot, nobody knows what to do. So he wants to make sure everybody knows. We're going to run across this field. I don't want anybody to put percussion caps on their rifles so that they're tempted to stop and fire. We're just going to sprint, run through their line, and start stabbing with our bayonets. And then we're going to create a hole in the line, and then the reinforcements are going to come to our aid. That's the plan. He's told it's a suicide mission. If you don't succeed, don't come back. But if you do, we'll promote you to Brigadier General. Hey, okay? And he's confident. He's ready to do this. As part of this, Gouverneur K. Warren is supposed to attack here again to hold these Confederates in place so they can't shift over as reinforcements. Ambrose Burnside, Dennis, I'm just going to turn you into Burnside tonight. I apologize for that. All right? Okay, if you channel your inner Burnside. So Burnside's going to attack down here to hold these Confederates in place so they can't shift over as reinforcements. And when Upton punches through, creates that gap, coming from back in the back of the room, Gershom Mott's undersized division is going to march forward and come into that gap, exploit the breakthrough, split Lee's army in half, and that's going to then lead to the destruction of the Army of Northern Virginia. Sounds easy, right? It's supposed to be at 5 o'clock, but it's going to take Upton a little while to get into position. As he does, Warren, who's had a bad couple days, sees the chance to do a little showboating over here, and he's going to ask for permission to go early, and he's so frantic about it, Grant says, "Okay, try." And at 4:30, he launches his attack, and he's repulsed in about 15 minutes. Well, in the meantime, Upton is told we'll wait till 6 so that Warren can get his act back together. But nobody can get a message all the way over to Burnside to say wait till 6. So at 5 o'clock, Burnside launches his attack like he's supposed to. And he gets almost to the village. But because he's so far away from the rest of the army, Grant's like, I don't know that I can support you. You might be in danger. Hunker down. And so Burnside will then have to dig entrenchments over here because he can't be supported. He's unable to exploit his opportunity. Gershom Mott comes from the back, 5 o'clock, because no one gets the memo to him. And the Confederate artillery that's right here has nothing else to shoot at. Let's shoot at Gershom Mott. And they blast him off the field within 10 minutes. So when Upton goes for his attack at 6 o'clock, he has lost his support on his right, he's lost his support on the left, and he's lost his reinforcements. And at 6 o'clock, he goes and he punches through and he creates that hole. And he looks for reinforcements and there's nobody. And he's going to hang on desperately, but the Confederates, who are not being pinned down over here, because Warren's not attacking, they swing over here and help close the gap. Upton is driven from the field. Well, he doesn't have to commit suicide. He is given his promotion. And one of the things I like about Grant, and we see it here, he's got this bad reputation for forward assaults, you know. Grant the butcher. He just does these frontal assaults. That's all he does. But here he's been willing to try innovation. And he's like, all right, what did Upton do right? And he realizes, like, Upton did exactly what he said he would do. It's the rest of the army that failed. So let's try it again, but let's do it with more men. A bigger fist. Let's say 20,000 guys instead of 6. And let's punch the Confederate position right on the nose. And let's have reinforcements ready this time. Another 20,000 guys from the 6th Corps. And Grant's going to replicate Upton's success on a larger scale on May 12th. For his fist, he's going to use Winfield Scott Hancock's 2nd Corps, which is kind of entangled up in some action over here along the Po River. And Hancock's going to have to shift into position to the back of the room. He's going to make that move on May 11th. As he does, it starts to rain. And it is a torrential, frog-choking rain. The streams flood, the roads turn to muddy mires. Because there's no cavalry to show anybody the way, people get lost. One of Hancock's division commanders, Francis Barlow, says, could someone at least point me in the direction of the Confederates so that I don't have to march? He's afraid he's going to have to march all the way around the world and come at them from the rear. Okay? And as they're getting into position over there, Burnside over here has been told, you know what? You're too exposed, pull back to where you were. So he's going to have to withdraw. But then Grant's like, maybe we shouldn't give up all that free real estate. Go back to where you were. And he's going to have to come over here. Imagine what that does for the morale for the men, right? Fighting, digging, marching through the mud. And as Lee is trying to read the tea leaves, he's seeing like this movement and this movement. And he thinks like, well, we fought for a couple days at the Wilderness. We came to a standstill, and Grant moved around my right. We've been here at Spotsylvania for a couple days. We fought to a standstill, and I'm getting reports of Grant moving around my right. And so Lee comes to the conclusion that Grant's trying to get around him again. And so he's going to try to mobilize a part of his army to intercept Grant's movement. And the first parts of the army he's going to mobilize are going to be his artillery. And the first artillery he's going to mobilize are the guns that are right here in the mule shoe because they're the furthest away from the roads. There are just a few cow paths that service this area. So he pulls these guns out and gets them going. Well, the division commander who's in this area, Edward Allegany Johnson, old grizzled veteran who had himself wounded at the foot in the Battle of McDowell in 1862, went off to Richmond to convalesce. He took a little longer to convalesce than people expected. Somehow earns a reputation as a ladies' man in Richmond, even though he's like a crusty old bugger. Okay. And when he comes back to the Army in 1863, just before the Gettysburg campaign, he's got a walking stick. And in the very politically correct tendencies of the day, they call him Old Clubby because he's got this walking stick. Right? And he's stalking up and down his lines. His pickets are sending him words. And he's like, he's getting reports of this movement, but he's convinced that the Federals are getting in a position to attack. And he goes to his boss, Richard Ewell, and he says, what's going on to my cannons? And he sounds just like that. That's a, you know. And Ewell explains what's going on. He's like, they're not moving around us. They're getting ready to attack. And so Ewell has to go to Lee and say, can we have some artillery back? And Lee says, all right, but they're so far away at this point, it'll be morning before they return. So hold tight. So Johnson will be stalking the lines. When he finally goes to bed, he's going to bed with his boots on and his walking cane right next to him. He knows that calamity is coming. And it is. 20,000 Federals under Winfield Scott Hancock are assembling in position. His attack's going to come in two waves. On the left is going to be that fist we've talked about under Francis Barlow. They're going to come along this side of the field. David Bell Birney in a more traditional line of battle, sweeping forward right at the tip. The attack's supposed to be at 4 o'clock in the morning. But this rain has cooled things off. It's been a very hot May thus far. And so the rain conjures fog up out of the bottomlands, and it makes the forests impenetrable to see through. And so Hancock is going to wait for about 25 minutes so that there's just enough pre-dawn light for guys to see. And at about 4:25, as they start to sweep forward, he knows this is a desperate mission. He says, "My boys, they will not come back to me. They will not come back to me." And they sweep through that pre-dawn light in the fog. No one's done any reconnaissance because there's no cavalry. And as they push forward and they get to the Confederate picket line, which is about the last line of tables here in the room, and it's a sunken farm lane, similar to what you see at Antietam where the sunken road is. And so the Confederate pickets there look like they're occupying the main line. And when the Federals sweep out and they get it, they're like, "Huzzah, we've catch you!" Oh, no, it's just, and it scares the pickets who come running back to the main Confederate line, along with that huzzah that echoes across the field. About a third of the men are in line that early in the morning. Another third of them are back behind the lines trying to sleep. And about a third of them are huddled around their campfires, their rifle stacked next to them, trying to cook up some breakfast and stay warm against this little drizzle. But the huzzah alerts everybody, and they flood into the ranks, and they know that the Yankees are coming, and they open fire. But they're shooting at that far ridge line. In the meantime, the Federals have pushed forward and into the field. And if you've been to Spotsylvania, you know that there is a big swale that cuts across that field. And it cuts diagonally. So from back where Ron is sitting, kind of up into this direction, into this area. And as the Federals sweep forward, they get down into that swale. So when the Confederates open fire, the volley goes over their heads. For the Confederates who were able to get a volley off. Stonewall Jim Walker realizes most of the guns in the Stonewall Brigade are fouled by the weather. These guys who've had their muskets stacked, rainwater has dripped down the barrels and wet the gunpowder. And so instead of a big volley, we get a lot of pop, 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 pop. So now the Confederates start frantically trying to unfoul their weapons and reload, even as the Federals come sweeping across that field. And Barlow's guys swing around like a left hook, punching through here, sweeping down in this direction, just capturing all these Confederates, among them Edward Allegany Johnson, who is on top of the works with a rifle in one hand and his club in the other, just trying to beat back the Yankee hordes, and the sheer weight of numbers overwhelms him, and he's captured and sent off to Hancock's headquarters. Also captured is one of his subordinates, a brigade commander, George Maryland Stewart, one of the highest ranking Marylanders in Lee's army. James Beaver of the 50th Pennsylvania, Beaver Stadium in Penn State is named after him. He captures Stewart. He sees this officer and he demands the officer's sword. And Stewart's like, "Well, y'all have arrived so early this morning, I hadn't had time to get my sword." I don't know why my Marylander sounds like a Kentucky colonel, but he does. And Beaver says, "Well, who are you?" And he says, "Well, I'm General Stewart of the Confederate Army." And Beaver's like, "I've captured Jeb Stuart. Oh my gosh." It's like, "No, I'm the other Stewart." And that's how he got his nickname, because he kept getting confused with Jeb. So he'll get sent off as a prisoner as well. As it happens, Hancock knew Johnson and Stewart in the pre-war army. In fact, Hancock and Johnson were great friends. And Hancock finds Johnson sitting on an ammunition crate with his head in his hands, just weeping openly at the destruction of his division. And Hancock tries to console his old friend. And Johnson's just like, "Oh, it's a calamity, it's a calamity." And he looks up at Hancock, and he collects himself, and he says, if this had to happen to me, I'm glad it was you if it was anyone. Very magnanimous in defeat. Stuart, a little less so. Hancock comes up to him and says, Stuart, glad to see you. Oh no, you're so much more cordial than he was. So Hancock puts his hand out, and Stuart says, well, I'm not glad to see you by damn sight. And Hancock's hand's just hanging there. Stuart says, under the circumstances, sir, I cannot accept your hands. And Hancock jerks his hand back and he says, well, sir, under other circumstances, I wouldn't have offered it. And so, because Stuart is such a jerk, he's made to walk to the rear with the other prisoners. Johnson, as is typically customary for an officer, is given a horse to ride to the rear. The greatest indignity for Stuart comes a little later, because he and Johnson will be sketched by an artist from Harper's Weekly among the prisoners of war in the back, and they're being guarded by United States colored troops, which for Stuart is a particularly galling fate. They're going to be among 3,000 Confederates that are just scooped up in this breakthrough. The breakthrough is finally stopped in this area here by James Lane's North Carolinians, who are already holding off a feeble attack from Burnside, and then, wait, where'd you come from? And they kind of have to do this double-sided defense. These are the men who accidentally shot Stonewall Jackson a year before. They've been living under that cloud ever since. They are hard-fighting, stalwart, dependable men. It was Jackson's fault entirely. I say that with love in my heart as a Jackson groupie, but it was his fault. And these guys have suffered for it for a year. And they saved Lee's army on May 12th. Meanwhile, David Bell Birney's men break through and they push down this side of the Mule Shoe. Hayes's Louisiana Tigers. Anybody here a Louisiana Tiger fan by chance? Not after today. Okay, they get totally wiped out. The Stonewall Brigade, totally wiped out. These are like some of the most famous units in Lee's army. They no longer exist as viable fighting forces because they're just scooped up in this attack. They're finally stopped down here by more North Carolinians under Junius Daniels. Daniels will get shot through the bowels and will die, but his men will hold. And this is where Lee comes to the battlefield with a gaping chest wound a half a mile wide in the middle of his army. And he's got to figure out what to do. Suspense is killing you, isn't it? First person he turns to is his second in command, Richard Ewell. And Ewell's going off like a teapot on the boil, sputtering, swearing, cussing, slapping his men with the broadside of his sword, extolling them, get back in the line. And they're just fleeing to the rear. And Lee is the picture of calm, cool composure. And he rises up to Ewell and he says, General Ewell, how do you propose to control your men if you cannot control yourself? And he gives Ewell a timeout. Okay? And instead he's going to turn to one of Ewell's subordinates, a lawyer from Georgia, John Brown Gordon. And Gordon's like, send me in, coach. I am ready. And so what Lee's going to do is take Gordon's men and lead them on a counterattack to link up with Lane's guys and flush the Federals out. Except the men refuse to go forward. They start shouting out, Lee to the rear! Lee to the rear. We will not go forward unless General Lee goes to the rear. It's the third time in a week that they've refused to let the commanding officer put himself in harm's way. Because they already know what Lee himself won't admit. He is the indispensable man of the Confederacy. And if something happens to him, game over. There's nobody else. The Confederates discover that a couple weeks later in the North Anna River. Without Lee, there's no one else. And Gordon, full cheerleader mode, he steps up, he says, General Lee, these men are Georgians. These men are Virginians. They've never failed you. They won't fail you now, will you boys? No. And the crowd goes wild. And so Gordon's going to lead those men in a counterattack, link up with Lane, pushing up toward the tip of the Mule Shoe, driving the Federals out of the works. The Federals simply hunker down on the other side, digging a parallel line of works, and they'll spend the rest of the day in the 12th trading pot shots back and forth with each other over here. Lee then turns his attention to this side of the Mule Shoe. He'll send in Stephen Ramjour's North Carolinians. I always love telling this story in Virginia because, like, the North Carolinians save the Army of Northern Virginia. And there's a lot of Virginia, North Carolina tension. And it's like, oh, well, look who comes to the rescue again. And the Tar Heels come in. They link up. They start driving the Federals out of here, pushing forward. Next comes Nathaniel Harris's Mississippians, many of whom were on campfire duty that morning. So imagine 800 crazy Mississippians coming at you with camp hatchets. That's got to be fun stuff. They get actually caught in a friendly fire incident, but they're going to link up and push forward, driving the Federals out of the works. Next comes Abner Perrin's Alabamians. Perrin knows this is a suicide mission. He says, I'm either coming back alive, Major General, or dead brigadier. And he comes back a dead brigadier. He's buried in the Fredericksburg City Cemetery. But his men link up, continuing to drive the Federals out of the works, closing that gap. Sam McGowan's South Carolinians come in. They've got a reputation to redeem. Lee had seen them just days before at the Wilderness and called them a flock of geese running from the fight. And McGowan leads them straight into the jaws of death. And one of the great bullet magnets of the war, he gets wounded for the 5th time as he's leading that attack. But his men link up, continuing to push their way up in that direction, even as the 20,000 reinforcements of the 6th Corps begin to flood across that field. But because of all the lead that's in the air, nobody wants to just come running right into the open gap. So they get into that swale, which serves as a funnel. So instead of coming straight across, it funnels them right into this area as McGowan's men are pushing up into that same area. And so then this area becomes the vortex of battle. One man describes it as a Golgotha, a place of skulls. Another describes it as a Saturnalia of blood and a panoply of horror. John Haley of the 17th Maine says it's a tempest of iron and lead. Men will call it hell's half-acre. But today we best know it as the bloody angle. A 13-degree bend in the line where for 20 straight hours, 22 if we count the start of Hancock's attack, these men will fight the most sustained hand-to-hand combat of the Civil War. In the pouring rain, in water up to their knees, mud sucking at their feet. They will fire at each other at point-blank range, stab each other with their bayonets, use their rifles as clubs, throw them like spears, use their camp hatchets, their knives, their fists, their teeth, anything. Men were not as men, but as demons. It was a roaring, bubbling, seething hell of hate and murder. And this goes on for 20 hours, not because Lee's trying to recapture the position, but because he's trying to seal it off. But in order to do this, he needs time. So he's going to trade the lives of his men to buy time to save the life of his army. And so this fight will continue as he seals this off. Those 30 artillery pieces that were on their way back show up just in time for 20 of them to get captured. The lead battery, William Carter's, gets off one shot. He's overwhelmed. Everyone else is captured. But those last 10 now get put into position along this new line. And around 2 a.m., Lee sends word to the front for his guys to begin to withdraw. And in 2s and 3s, they start slipping to the rear. The Federals realize something's up. They make a final push, capture the last couple hundred guys that are here, and make a cautious advance into the interior of the Muleshoe. And these artillery pieces open up on them, discouraging that pursuit. And so they fall back outside of the works, even as dawn begins to lighten the drizzling sky. And the scene that they see out there is unprecedented in their experience in this war. One Union officer talks about being able to walk from Hancock's headquarters to the tip of the salient without ever touching the ground because of the carpet of blue bodies across that field. And they don't even look like bodies anymore. They're so shot up. One doctor describes corpses as being jellies. One ambulance driver, as he's trying to put bodies onto a stretcher to evacuate them from the battlefield, doesn't have anything firm enough to hold on to lift the corpse. He says bodies are like sponges. There was a 22-inch oak tree near the tip of the salient that got shot down over the course of the fight by bullets. And I ask you to think, how much soft lead does it take to cut down 22 inches of hard oak? And you can see that stump on display at the Museum of American History in D.C. if you ever go. It's an incredible artifact. And the battle's not finished yet. We're only halfway through Spotsylvania Courthouse. Some 9,000 federal casualties just on this day alone, some 8,000 Confederates, and the fight's not over. The rain will last for 5 more days, and it's going to really impede operations. Grant's going to then try to shift his army over to this side of the battlefield, but he's used to those small, springy, quick-acting armies that he had out west. The Army of the Potomac is not that army. So it just can't move quickly, and in the rain and in the dark and with no cavalry to show the way, they can't get over here in time to exploit an opportunity on the morning of the 14th. On the 15th, Confederate cavalry is going to run into Grant's supply train, and they're going to end up getting into a fight with the United States colored troops, which get engaged against Lee's army for the first time. And they're going to embarrass the Confederate cavalry so badly that their commander, Thomas Rosser, won't mention that he got beat, and he won't mention that he was fighting black troops. On the 16th, it still rains too much for Grant to shift. On the 17th, things start to dry out, and he's going to move his army back into this position for an attack on the 18th. But these guys have had 5 days to just keep digging. And so when that attack comes on the 18th, they can't even get within rifle range because this position is now so strong with its artillery. And that'll only last for 3 hours, and Grant calls that off. And he realizes, just not going to get at Lee. So he's going to set in motion plans to just go around him again. Head down toward the North Anna River and lure him out. Except Lee's not done. These guys have been here, and they're going to take an opportunity to go sweeping up and around and try to get into Grant's rear. This is the 2nd Corps under Richard Ewell. He's got 7,000 guys, and he's going to strike the Fredericksburg Road behind Burnside's old position. When we talk about the War of Attrition, a year earlier, when the Confederate 2nd Corps made its flank march through Chancellorsville with 28,000 guys, now a year and a week later, there's 7,000. There are some various reasons for that, but the Confederate 2nd Corps has 21,000 fewer men. Ewell's going to find himself outmatched over here because this is not only the supply line, but Grant literally has fresh reinforcements marching down this road. Heavy artillery units that have come from the defenses of Washington, regiments that are like 1,600 guys strong. And they're all green, and they just stand out in the open and slug it out with Ewell's veterans. Even Ewell's guys say it's one of the bravest things they ever saw in the war. And those heavy artillery units take staggering casualties, but they tie Ewell's guys down enough for veteran members of the Army of the Potomac to come flooding in. Ewell's almost overwhelmed and destroyed, and only darkness saves him and allows him to escape. And so on the 20th, Grant looks around. Any more shenanigans from the Confederates? No. And then he will begin his withdrawal on the night of the 20th into the 21st. And the landscape that these armies leave behind looks like a plague of locusts has visited the land. It is biblical in its apocalyptic destruction. And if you go there today, and you stand there and you can feel the breeze in your face, and hear the birds, the hum of the insects. The juxtaposition is one of the most sublime experiences you can have on a battlefield. And I think that the men who fought and suffered, who sacrificed and died, and the families, the shattered families they left behind, I think they'd be glad to have you there to remember their stories. Thank you. Questions? I don't want anyone to turn into a pumpkin. We're getting late, but if there's questions.
Any questions, comments, concerns?
One quick one. At some point, did Grant think about leaving a little earlier? I mean, maybe that's a really broad question, but Grant's at Spotsylvania for quite a while, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
What was the definitive moment where he says, we were going to try to flank him again, and like you said, go to North Carolina?
It's really when he's repulsed on the 18th, when he can't get close enough to even engage his infantry. And he's like, they've been here for 2 weeks or 13 days. It's just too strong. I'm not going to get at him. He's tried moving. He's tried outflanking. One reason that he tries this attack on the 18th is because as he's shifted over here, Lee strips guys from that side of the battlefield to extend his line this way. And he thinks like, well, he keeps being strong wherever I hit him. He's got to be weak someplace. Let me try him back up there. And when he finds that, that's still strong, this isn't going to work. So.
What does he say if it takes all summer? Is that really?
So he actually says that on the morning of the 11th of May. Yep. And he says, I intend to fight it along this line if it takes all summer. Yep. Other questions? I'll be happy to stick around and chat one-on-one if folks have questions or comments or discussions. I am sensitive that it's getting a little late. Friday night, who wants to be talking Civil War stuff? It's Friday night. Let's go. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real privilege.